The knock came just after midnight, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the silence of the house like a blade through glass. I remember the sound because it woke me from a dreamless sleep, pulling me upright in bed before my mind even understood why. My husband lay beside me, breathing deeply, his chest rising and falling with a rhythm that suggested nothing could disturb him. But something about that knock felt final, like the beginning of a story I never wanted told. I padded barefoot across the cold wooden floor, robe clutched tight, and pulled open the door. 2 officers stood in the porch light, rain dripping from the brims of their hats, faces pale and resolute. The taller one spoke my name in a voice that seemed almost rehearsed, as though he had said it too many times that night. Behind him, the other officer scanned the shadows of the house, his eyes darting like a man already hunting for evidence. They asked if my husband was home. They said they needed to speak with him. My heart began to thud against my ribs, the way it does when you sense something terrible but can't yet name it. I turned my head, glancing back at the bedroom, where he still slept, unaware of the storm that had arrived at our door. I wanted to shut them out. I wanted to tell them they had the wrong address, that my husband was no one worth disturbing at such an hour. But their eyes told me there would be no refusal. I woke him gently, whispering his name, and he stirred, bleary and confused. When he saw the officers, he blinked once, twice, then rose without a word, pulling on trousers and a shirt with movements that seemed too calm. That calm unsettled me more than their presence. They didn't say what it was about, not immediately. Only that they needed him to come to the station. He agreed, his voice steady, almost relieved, as though he had been expecting this moment all along. As they led him to the patrol car, I stood in the doorway, shivering in the night air, the robe clinging damp to my skin. I caught his eyes for a fleeting second before the door closed. It wasn't fear I saw there. It wasn't even surprise. It was something colder, something that made my breath catch. The car pulled away, taillights vanishing into the wet darkness, and I was left alone with a house that suddenly felt unfamiliar, every shadow deeper, every silence heavier. I tried to convince myself it was some misunderstanding, maybe a witness statement, maybe mistaken identity. But even as I poured a glass of water to steady my trembling hands, a thought began to grow like poison in my mind. What if the man I shared my bed with was not the man I thought I knew? I wandered through the house in restless circles, every room whispering with memories now tainted by suspicion. The study where he spent long nights, door locked, claiming he had work to finish. The garage where he tinkered with tools, the metallic scent clinging to his clothes. The small cuts on his hands he explained away as accidents. Little details that once seemed meaningless now gathered into something heavier, darker. When the phone finally rang hours later, it was the same officer. His voice was flat, his words precise. My husband was being held on suspicion of murder. The glass slipped from my hand and shattered on the kitchen tiles, water spreading like blood across the floor. A single word echoed through my skull, louder than the shatter, louder than the officer's voice. Murder. And suddenly the quiet life I thought I lived was gone, replaced by a nightmare in which my husband might not just be accused, but guilty. I pressed the receiver to my ear, asking questions I didn't remember forming. Who had died? What proof did they have? Was this real, or had the universe made some grotesque mistake? The officer wouldn't give details, only that they needed me at the station in the morning for questioning. When I hung up, the house seemed to close in around me, its walls pressing tighter, its air thicker. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes I saw his expression as he left. That eerie calm, that absence of shock. By dawn, the newspapers would splash his name across their front pages. By noon, our friends and neighbors would whisper about me in hushed tones, wondering what kind of wife could live beside a murderer and never see it. But in those first lonely hours of the night, with only the echo of the shattered glass for company, I realized the more terrifying question wasn't about who my husband had killed. It was about how much I already knew and refused to see. The station smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee, a strange blend that clung to my clothes as I sat in the waiting room. Chairs lined the walls like an audience, silent and judgmental. Every tick of the clock above the reception desk hammered at my nerves. I felt as though I had stepped into a stage play where I did not know my lines, only that the audience already believed me guilty of something unseen. An officer led me into a room with gray walls and a table scarred by years of questions. They asked me to sit. A recorder was switched on with a sharp click, the red light glowing like an unblinking eye. The questions began softly, almost politely. Did I know where my husband was last night? Had he spoken of any disputes with acquaintances or colleagues? Had I noticed changes in his behavior recently? Each question pierced deeper, pulling at threads of memory. I thought of his late nights, his locked study, his calm acceptance of arrest. I answered as best I could, but with every word I gave, I feared I was weaving a noose around his neck. Or perhaps around my own. When I asked what he was accused of, the officer's expression barely shifted. A man named Daniel Mercer had been found dead. Beaten. Left in an abandoned warehouse by the river. My husband's fingerprints were at the scene. His car had been spotted near the docks the night before. Witnesses claimed to have seen him arguing with the victim only days earlier, Daniel Mercer. The name meant nothing to me. Yet when they spoke it, something flickered in my mind, a shadow of recognition I couldn't place. I insisted I had never heard it before. They asked about finances, about trips my husband had taken without explanation. They asked whether I had ever suspected him of violence. I wanted to laugh at that. My husband? Violent? The man who kissed my forehead each morning, who poured me tea each evening. But the laughter stuck in my throat, bitter and hollow. When they finally released me, the sky outside was pale, the streets still wet from night rain. I walked home with the sensation that every window I passed concealed eyes watching me, whispering about the woman whose husband killed a man. Inside, the house was silent again, as though it held its breath. I went to his study, the one room he had kept locked from me. The door was ajar now, left unsecured in their haste. I stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of iron and ink. Papers littered the desk, contracts, receipts, names scribbled in hurried handwriting. Among them was a photograph, creased at the edges. It showed my husband standing beside Daniel Mercer, both smiling in what appeared to be a bar. My stomach twisted. They had known each other. Beside the photograph lay a ledger, pages of numbers, sums, payments transferred between names I didn't recognize. Yet one name appeared again and again, circled in red ink. Daniel Mercer. A sudden dread coursed through me. Business dealings, money exchanged, debts owed, and at the center of it all, my husband. I sat on the floor with the ledger open, trying to piece together fragments. What kind of dealings had he hidden from me? Was Daniel Mercer a partner? An enemy? I wanted to believe this was all a mistake, a frame-up, some cruel coincidence. But the evidence piled around me like bricks forming a wall. And buried beneath it was a truth I had ignored for too long. My husband had secrets vast enough to swallow us both. The hours blurred as I sifted through papers. Then, tucked in a drawer, I found something colder than numbers or names. A watch. Its glass face cracked, strap stained with something dark. I stared at it, bile rising in my throat. The initials on the back read, D.M. Daniel Mercer. My hands trembled as I set it down, the weight of the object burning into my palm even after it left my fingers. By evening, when the officers returned for further questioning, I wasn't just the wife of a suspect. I was holding evidence in my hands, evidence that suggested the man I loved might truly be guilty. And worse, part of me wondered whether keeping it hidden was already a crime in itself. The world had split in two. On one side, the life I thought I knew. On the other, the abyss into which I was falling. And somewhere between them, my husband waited, calm as ever, perhaps smiling that same cold smile. I could not eat. I could not sleep. The watch lay in a drawer upstairs, hidden beneath a stack of old scarves, yet its presence haunted me as though it were still in my hand. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the cracked face, the dried stain on the strap, the cold initials that sealed my husband's fate. The police returned that morning, their questions sharper now, less polite. They asked whether I had found anything unusual in the house. I lied, the words sticking like ash on my tongue. No, nothing. My husband had never brought home anything suspicious. I played the role of loyal wife even as my pulse hammered in my ears. After they left, silence once again wrapped the house. But it was not the comforting silence of ordinary life. It was the silence of a stage just before the curtain rises, thick with tension, waiting for the next act to begin. I knew then that waiting would kill me. Sitting idly while strangers wrote the story of my husband's guilt would consume me. If I wanted the truth, I would have to seek it myself. The photograph of my husband with Daniel Mercer became my compass. Where had it been taken? Who else had been there? I studied the background. A neon sign blurred, but still legible enough. The lantern. A bar near the river. That evening I went there. The place smelled of stale beer and cigarette smoke, its wooden floors sticky underfoot. Men hunched over drinks, their faces weathered, their eyes suspicious of strangers. I carried the photograph in my pocket, my courage in my throat. The bartender eyed me with practiced indifference until I slid the picture across the counter. His expression shifted, a flicker of recognition quickly masked. He poured a drink, leaned closer, and muttered that yes, both men had come here often. They drank together, argued sometimes, but always returned. Business partners, maybe? Something about shipments, warehouses, shipments, warehouses, words that carried the weight of crime. I asked what they argued about. The bartender's lips tightened. Money, he said. Always money. He would say no more. I left the bar with more questions than answers, the night air damp against my skin. My husband had been tied to Mercer not just by acquaintance, but by something deeper, something transactional. Debts, perhaps. Deals that soured. At home, I returned to the ledger. With the bar's hint, the numbers began to make sense. Payments moved through shell names, transfers linked to docks and shipping companies. Smuggling, perhaps. Illegal trade. Whatever it was dangerous enough to end in death. As I pieced the puzzle together, I began to realize something chilling. My husband had hidden not just his business from me, but an entire life. A life of shadows and deals, of men like Daniel Mercer, men who did not forgive debts easily. But another detail gnawed at me. Why had he left the ledger behind? Why had he kept Mercer's watch in the house, evidence so damning it could hang him? My husband was meticulous, cautious. To leave such incriminating pieces lying in drawers felt almost deliberate. Unless they were meant to be found. A shiver ran through me as I considered it. Could he have planted them for me? Was I being drawn into a trap I could not yet see? The phone rang, making me jump. A voice on the other end, low and urgent, told me to stop digging, that I was putting myself in danger. The line went dead before I could respond. I stood in the kitchen, the receiver trembling in my grip, the shadows of the house pressing close. Someone knew what I was doing. Someone was watching. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just the wife of a suspected murderer. I was the next loose end in a game I didn't understand. When I tried to sleep, the phone call replayed in my mind, its warning echoing like a curse. Stop digging. But I knew I couldn't. Because whether or not my husband had killed Daniel Mercer, one truth was already certain. If I did nothing, I would be the next to disappear. The weeks that followed were a blur of fear, suspicion, and unanswered questions. Claire lived each day in a fragile balancing act, pretending to be the doting wife while secretly piecing together the puzzle of Daniel's lies. Every morning she made his coffee. Every evening she smiled at his jokes. But behind that smile, her mind raced with the chilling knowledge that she was sharing her bed with a killer. She couldn't go to the police, yet. Not without proof. She needed something undeniable. Something that would tie Daniel directly to the string of disappearances whispered about in the town. One evening, while Daniel was out on a late meeting, Claire crept into his study again. Her pulse pounded as she pried open a drawer she hadn't checked before. Inside was a small locked box. She almost didn't dare, but she had found the spare key weeks ago taped beneath his desk. Her hands shook as the lid clicked open. Inside were photographs. Women. Some she recognized from news reports. Missing persons. Some she didn't. All of them smiling, alive, unaware that these snapshots would one day be evidence of their last days. Beneath the photos were personal trinkets, a necklace, a scarf, even a blood-stained earring. Claire's breath hitched. This was no longer suspicion. This was proof. Just then, the sound of the garage door opening jolted her. Panic surged. She stuffed the box back, relocked it, and hurried out, forcing herself to appear calm by the time Daniel entered the kitchen. He kissed her cheek casually, his hands smelling faintly of leather gloves. "Miss me?" he asked. Claire forced a smile. Always. But she knew. He was the monster the town feared, and now he was growing suspicious of her. That night, lying in bed beside him, she barely slept. She felt his arm around her, heavy, possessive. To anyone else, it might look like a tender gesture. To Claire, it felt like a chain. The next morning, Daniel surprised her. "I think we should take a little trip," he said, his tone casual, though his eyes gleamed with something sharper. "Just the two of us, away from all distractions." Her blood ran cold. A trip. With him. Alone. No witnesses. No escape. Claire smiled, hiding the terror clawing at her throat. That sounds lovely. But inside she knew the truth. If she went with him, she might never come back. And so she made a silent vow. If Daniel was planning to end her life on this trip, she would make sure he didn't return either. The car rolled through the winding roads, the trees pressing close on either side like silent sentinels of fate. Claire sat rigid, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, though no one sat behind her. Daniel's hands gripped the wheel with a calm precision that made her stomach churn. Every turn, every shadow passing the windows seemed like a threat, every mile carrying her closer to the edge of her life. She thought of the photographs, the trinkets, the ledger, proof she had painstakingly gathered. Evidence that could destroy him, or at least put him behind bars. But this was different. This was personal. This wasn't about courts or police. It was about survival. Daniel glanced at her briefly, lips curling into that familiar cold smile. "You've been very busy, haven't you?" he said. "Peeking through my things, asking questions. I like that you care, but curiosity can be dangerous." Claire forced a polite laugh, her mind racing. "I just wanted to make sure everything was in order before we left town. You know, for safety." He chuckled, a sound that made her bones ache. Safety is overrated. The car came to a sudden stop at the edge of a river where the road narrowed and the night seemed to hang heavier than the clouds above. Daniel killed the engine. Silence wrapped the vehicle, suffocating and absolute. "Why here?" Claire asked, voice steady despite the terror crawling under her skin. Daniel's gaze softened, almost tenderly. "Because it's private. Because no one can interrupt us here. I wanted to explain things. Properly." Claire's heart hammered. She knew better than to believe any explanation. She had learned his patterns, his lies, his darkness. She had studied the diary of his life, each secret he had buried, each crime meticulously executed. And she had prepared. Slowly, deliberately, she reached under her coat and felt the cold steel of the small handgun she had acquired the previous week. She had convinced a neighbor she needed it for protection, and now it was in her lap, weight familiar, comforting. Daniel noticed nothing, too consumed by his own confidence. She remembered each missing woman, each ledger entry, each blood-stained token tucked away in the locked drawer at home, and she realized that she had been underestimated. He had never expected her to fight back. As he stepped out of the car, stretching, she moved with calculated calm. "Daniel," she called softly, "before you say anything, I know." He froze, then laughed, low and cruel. "No? Oh, my dear, do you think you know?" Claire's finger tightened on the trigger. "I've seen your ledger. I found your photographs, your toys, your trophies, everything, and I kept a copy." His smile faltered. You're clever. I'll give you that. But cleverness doesn't save you from me." She leveled the gun. "I don't intend to be saved." Time slowed. The river water lapped against the banks. The wind whispered through the trees, the night holding its breath. Daniel moved suddenly, his instincts razor-sharp. But Claire had anticipated him, had watched him for weeks, had memorized his patterns, his subtle tells. One step too close, one miscalculated motion. Claire fired. The sound cracked the night like thunder. Daniel stumbled, a look of shock on his face, then pain, then disbelief. He fell to the gravel, the gun slipping from his hand. Claire's hands shook, but she didn't lower the weapon. She approached him slowly, carefully, ensuring he could not rise again. Her mind raced with both relief and horror. She had ended it, yes, but at what cost to her own soul? Daniel's eyes met hers, wide with a mixture of fear and anger, fading to something almost human in the last seconds of life. You'll never be safe," he whispered. Then he was still. Claire sank to her knees beside him, the adrenaline ebbing, leaving a hollow ache. The river reflected the moonlight across the scene, silver and cold. She realized that for years, she had lived in the shadow of a man she thought she loved, never truly knowing the danger that lurked behind every word, every smile. The police would come. They would take statements, collect evidence, investigate. But for now, in this lonely stretch by the river, she allowed herself a single moment of clarity. She had survived. She had outsmarted him. She had fought. And in that moment, she knew she would never trust the world in the same way again. Love, marriage, intimacy, all had been masks hiding darker truths. Claire rose, looking down at Daniel one last time. The man she had married, the man the world would never forget, was gone. And she walked back to the car, her heart heavy but her spirit unbroken. The diary of his crimes burned in her mind and preserved in her courage. She started the engine. The night stretched before her, uncertain, shadowed, but hers. This, my dear friends, is the end of this story. Stay with us for the next one, and don't forget to subscribe for more chilling audiobooks.